Guys, welcome to javaisawesome, and in this video we are going to talk about data types in Java. Because if you do any data structure concept, if you learn anything in that, data structures and data types is very important. Okay, so without data types understanding, you can't go and you can't hit and write a code anything. It is not possible. So definitely you have to take the idea about the data types. So data types is really very important in your life also. Okay, like you have a lots of the bucket, and in which bucket you have to put what. If you don't know how we can arrange anything, okay, so for arranging purpose, data types is really very important. Okay, it's playing the very important parts. Okay, so if I tell you like what is the use of data structures and what we can do with the data, I hope you know about it. Okay, what we are doing exactly with the data. So if I talk about what are the data types are exist in Java, so in Java two types of the data structure are exist. One is primitive type data structures, okay, and in other hand which is non-primitive, you can say. Correct. In the primitive, for storing any boolean type of the value, we can take boolean type of data structures. If you want to store any character type of the data, character type of the data means boolean type of data means true false. So you can store true, you can store false. Apart from this, if you store anything else, it will not support, it will give the exceptions. If you go to characters, so in the character also you can store only one character, maybe the C, maybe the D, maybe the F, whatever the characters we have. So it will store only the single characters. But if you talk about the integer, so integer supporting the various types, integer supporting the various type. What are those types? So if you see here, what are the types are supporting? So if you see, integer supports byte, short, int, long. Okay, so what is the byte? So byte having a one range, byte having one range. In that range only this will store the data. Okay, in the same way, short having a some range, in that range only it will store the data. Int having a some range, in that range only it will store the data. Long having a some range, and long will store some long type of the data which is greater than int. So first byte, what is the byte size? 128. Okay, so in the 128 minus 120 minus 127 to plus 128, in that between data you can store. If you store something upper limit on that, okay, like 300 400, it will not support, and it will maybe the do one round and it will store some negative value. Okay, so that time you can confuse. So as a developer, our responsibility is we have to think about the data, like what type of the data we have and what is the range of my data. Based on that only you can store, and every type of the data types having a different range, different having a size. So that, for example, you have to store the age. So age will be maximum will be possible 128. So byte is good for that. But in that place, if you take the integer or long, it will store the data, those also. But the problem is it will take more size. So your program is performance is low, it will slow, it will not work like that efficient as much we are expecting. So you have to think based on the time complexity, based on the space complexity, and that basis only you have to take the decisions like which data type is like good suitable for me to store the data. Okay, so byte is it's a lower, then after short, then after int, then after long. So anyone will take the data, it will store it, but only integer type of the data it will take. If you have a very big data, you can take the help of long. If you have a small data in between some range, you can take the int. I have already discussed what is the range, so I'm not going to explain those things, just I'm giving the overview. If you want to store the float type of the data, float type of the data means, so integer type of the data means like whatever the data we have, like 128 minus 127, okay, those type of data, which is something like only a integer, not any float. But if we talk about the float, so in the float you can store like the data 4.5, 6.8 to 8.60.8607.4. so the floating point of the value which is having a dot, you can store inside the float also, but float having a some limited size. Okay, in that only it will store the data, but if you have a large amount of the data, you can go and take the help of double will store any big data if you give and if you give the dot. Okay, so it's storing a very large amount of the data also. So this part is I have covered, and which is going to store only the data which is primitive data, single data we have. But if you want to store the data like a non-primitive means it will not store only single data, it will store bulk amount of data, it will store customized data, whatever the data we have. So this is the type of non-primitive data types, or sometimes we can say reference data type also. So array means whatever the data we have, which is large amount of data, like we have to store 10, 20, 30, 40. Okay, like that data you have to store, then you can take the help of array. Not one single data, you have a lots of the data, and at the single iterations you have to store, so take the help of the array. That is the reference type of data. Class means if you have a something like whatever the data types we have, they are not supporting to store those data. For example, a student. Okay, so a student having some data like ID, name, okay, and email. So email, lots more. So those type of the data they are not able to store like a array. That is not a good way to store inside this. So that time we can take the help of the class, and with the help of the class we can declare our field which is ID, int ID, a string name, a string email, and through that we can create the getter setter and we can store it. Okay, for the interface it will provide the rules, regulations, and some of the basic functionality which you have to give the subclass. Okay, correct, clear? And a string will store the single data only, but if you have a big string, I am Prince Kumar, and this data you have to store, then take the help of the strings and you can store it. If you want to store some data like enum means the data which is accessible, okay, directly, so that time you can create one enum, and whatever the data you have to give, A, B, C, D, I already explained it. So those data you can store it and you can access it directly. Okay, so that time you can take the help of the enum. So those are the non-primitive data types, and these are the primitive data side we have discussed. But apart from this, if you come to the data structure concept, okay, if you come to the data structure concept, so they will provide some more flexibility to store the data. Okay, for example, I have to store some data based on the linked list. Linked list means I have to store the data in one node. Okay, one node, and every node will link to each others. Okay, that time you have to take the help of the linked list. Okay, so if you go to the Java, they have provided the linked list class, so you can take the help of that and you can implement it. Okay, if you want to store some data as a stack means first in you have a one queue, one box, and the data it will store like if this is the entry and this is the exist only. Okay, so if it is first in, last out, the people will come first, it will go to the last. Okay, it will support this data structure. If you go to the queue, this is also your box, it will store the data, but behavior is something different. Okay, if you store any data, you can read from here. Okay, so if you store any data, for example, first it will go to the 10, then you have stored 20, then you have stored 30. So first in, first out. So first it will go first in and first out. So first it will do 10, then 20, then 30, like that. But here if you store the data something like 10, 20, 30, then first if you move it, 30 will came, then 20 will came, then 10 will came. So this is the some difference having some behavior, like how to store the data in the queue or stack. In the same way, if you want to store some data like in the map format or graph format, okay, so let me give here explanation of those also. For example, you have to store the data as a tree. This is the one of structure of the data types only. Tree. So tree means we have a one node, okay, with that node we have a connected some other node, okay, with that connected some other node, some other node, some other node, some other node. So if you store the data in the hierarchy format, for example file structures, then you can go and take the help of the tree data types, tree data structures, and you have to create it like that, and you have to implement and you have to work on that, okay. If you want to work with something map, okay, in that case you have to create the map data types. So in Java also having a one map which is supporting the key value pair, so it will create like that, one is key and one is value, and whatever the value we have stored, so key and value, key value, it will store the data, okay, in the table format you can say, okay. But if you want to customize it, you can customize and you can store the data like that also. This is the one node, other node, other node, other node, and you can link all those node to each others. That is also called a map. So we can discuss all those things one by one, but those are the data types that exist in Java and you can do the work on that, okay. Let's do some example. For example, I want to take the help of the integer. So int a equal to 20 or 10, whatever. If I try to store here any other value, for example boolean or true, it will not give me permission to store it. If I try to store something like that value, it will not give me permission to store here. If I give something like single c, it will store. Why? Because this will automatically convert in one ASCII value of c. Small c ASCII value it will convert and it will store the ASCII value inside the integers. So that is possible. But if you write something a string type of the data, it will not store, that will not support. So the every data types having a specific nature, okay, a specific nature, like this having a boolean nature, this having a character nature, this having an integer nature, this having a float nature. So based on that only they will store the data, okay. I hope you clear. So you have to decide as a developer which data I have to store and where I have to store. This is your decision completely, and you have to take care of it also, okay. So we have already discussed how to take the input and how to store the data, what are the data types that exist in the DSA or Java. With the help of that we can design the DSA and we can do the work on that, okay. But while creating an array, while creating a linked list, while creating a map, in Java they have given us some inbuilt classes. For example, if you want to create an array list, you can create it. They have a one array list class. With the help of this list, you can just give the what is the type safe or typecast, which is a string I have to store, and now you can write array list, okay. And through that we can create one array. If you want to create linked list, they have a class, but this linked list does not have that much of the flexibility to store the data which we are talking, okay. This will also take the string and data equal to new linked list, okay. If I talk about the Java, in the Java having a map, so we can take the hash map for storing the data, but it will store the value inside the key value pair. So one is integer and other one value I will take as a string, and like that we can create an object of map equal to new hash map, and we can do the work with this one, okay. So these are the data types which is already available inside the collections, but if you talk about the data structures, we can take the help of those data structures if it is required. If it is not, we can design our own classes which is going to support to store our data. Okay, so we can do all those things one by one, but you have to practice, guys. I hope. Why I'm assuming it, like I'm just describing it, you have to practice like how to use the array list, linked list or hash map your own if you watch this video. Okay, okay, thank you so much.